The salty air was the first thing she had grown to love about this small coastal town. It was a constant, a clean smell that mixed with the scent of pine from the nearby woods. For Clara, a woman who had spent her life surrounded by the quiet, busty perfume of old books, this fresh living air felt like a new chapter. She had moved here just 3 months ago, leaving behind the city and her job as a librarian to be closer to her brother, whose health wasn't what it used to be. At 58, she was looking for a slower pace, a simpler life. That's what she told herself anyway. This evening, the salty air carried the faint sound of a bell, the town's call for its monthly meeting. Clara pulled her light cardigan tighter around her shoulders and walked the short distance to the town hall. The hall was a simple wooden building that smelled faintly of floor wax and old coffee. Inside, about 30 people were settled into squeaky folding chairs, a small but dedicated crowd for a town this size. She found a seat near the back, recognizing a few faces from her walks to the local grocery store, but not knowing any names. The mayor, a man with a kind face framed by worry lines, stood at the front. He ran a hand through his thinning hair and sighed, a sound so heavy it seemed to absorb all the noise in the room. "All right, folks," he began, his voice tired but clear. "Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or, I should say, the giant patch of weeds in the room." A few people chuckled nervously. Clara knew exactly what he was talking about. It was the old public garden, a large piece of land right in the center of town. From the photos she'd seen in the library's local history section, it used to be beautiful, a place with rose bushes and a small pond. Now it was just a tangled mess of overgrown weeds, a broken fence, and the ghost of a stone path. It was an eyesore, a sad, empty spot in the heart of the town. "We've had the same conversation for the last 5 years," the mayor continued, leaning on the podium, "and the answer is always the same. There is no money in the town budget for a full restoration. 0. He let that sink in. "The best we can do is maybe, and I mean maybe, pay for some weed killer and a couple of hours of work from the public works crew." An older man in a flannel shirt spoke up from the front row. "So it just sits there, looking like that? It's embarrassing when relatives come to visit." I know," the mayor said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "But here's the deal. If someone, anyone, wants to take charge of it, the town will support you. We can provide the water from the main line. But," and he stressed this word, looking around the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could, "you have to keep it simple. I'm serious. No grand plans, no fancy water features. A few flower beds, maybe mow it so it looks like a field instead of a jungle. That's it. If it becomes complicated, if it starts asking for money we don't have, we're shutting it down. Simple." The word simple hung in the air. It was a warning, a boundary, a cage. People started shifting in their seats, the energy in the room deflating. The mayor's conditions, meant to be helpful, felt like a final nail in the coffin for the old garden. Who would want to take on such a big job with so many restrictions? The murmur in the crowd faded into a resigned silence. The meeting moved on to other topics, like the need for a new stop sign and the upcoming summer bake sale. But Clara barely heard them. Her mind was stuck on that patch of land. She was a librarian. Her entire life had been about bringing order to chaos, about seeing the potential in a dusty, forgotten book and knowing it just needed the right hands to bring its story to life. That's what she saw when she looked at that garden. It wasn't just weeds and dirt. It was a story waiting to be written. She saw not just flower beds, but paths. She saw not just a mowed field, but a place for a bench where someone could sit and read. She saw a place for children to play, for neighbors to meet, for quiet moments. After the meeting, as people were filing out, her brother found her by the door. He was a good man, his face a softer version of her own, and he looked at her with a familiar, concerned expression. "Don't you get any ideas, Clara?" he said, his voice low but firm. "Ideas about what?" she asked, feigning innocence. "That garden, that whole keep it simple speech. It was a nice thought, but it's a trap. That land is too much work for one person." They started walking home together, the cool evening air a welcome relief from the stuffy hall. "I was just thinking it's a shame," Clara said quietly. It could be so lovely. Good, he agreed. But you just got here. You should be relaxing, going for walks on the beach, not trying to save the world one weed at a time. If you're going to do something, just keep it simple. Really. A couple of potted plants by your front door. That's simple. That's manageable. Don't get tangled up in the town's problems. He meant well, she knew. He was worried about her heart, about her tendency to see a project and throw her whole self into it. But as he talked, all she could hear was the mayor's voice, and now his, echoing the same word, simple. It felt like they were underestimating her, or worse, underestimating the possibility of the place itself. Later that night, after her brother had gone home, Clara made a cup of tea and stood by her kitchen window. Looking out in the direction of the forgotten garden, she couldn't see it from here, but she could feel it. It was a blank page. And everyone was telling her to just write a single sentence. But in her heart, in that quiet, meticulous librarian's soul, she knew the land was begging for a whole novel. She wasn't thinking about grand, expensive plans. She was thinking about hard work, about community, about the quiet magic of things growing. They told her to keep it simple. But as she sipped her tea, a different idea, a more complex and beautiful one, began to take root in her mind. This wasn't going to be simple at all. It was going to be a story. And she was just the person to start writing it. The first Saturday morning felt different. The sun wasn't just a light in the sky. It was a weight, a promise of the heat to come. Clara stood at the edge of the neglected land, a pair of thick leather gloves on her hands and a heavy shovel leaning against her leg. The plot was even worse up close. Weeds taller than her waist, with thick, woody stems that looked like they'd been there for a decade. Old, rusted cans and bits of broken glass were hidden in the tangled mess. The air, instead of smelling of potential, smelled of damp earth and decay. For a brief moment, the mayor's words echoed in her mind. Keep it simple. Her brother's worried face flashed before her eyes. This felt anything but simple. It felt like trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon. She took a deep breath, a salty air, a small comfort, and gripped the shovel. She chose a spot near the edge, a corner that seemed slightly less overgrown. The first push of the shovel into the ground was a shock. The soil was hard, almost like clay, packed down by years of neglect. She had to put her whole weight onto it, her foot pressing down on the edge of the blade, just to get it a few inches into the ground. She leveraged it back, and a clump of weeds and dirt came loose. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. She tossed the clump onto a growing pile she'd started. Then she did it again, and again. The work was rhythmic and mind-numbing. Shove, lever, toss. Shove, lever, toss. The sun climbed higher, and a bead of sweat trickled down her spine. Her back, which was usually fine, began to ache in a new, insistent way. She was a librarian, used to standing and walking, not this brute force. After an hour, she straightened up, her hands raw inside the gloves, and looked at what she had accomplished. It was a pathetic little square, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. It looked like a bald spot on a very hairy, very sick dog. A wave of discouragement washed over her. This could take forever. The whole town could see her struggling, failing. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was a lost cause. She was about to call it a day, to retreat to the quiet comfort of her small house, when she noticed something. In the small, cleared patch, the soil looked dark and rich. It was tired, but it was alive. It just needed a chance. She thought of the books she used to handle, the ones with broken spines and dusty covers. People would pass them by, but she knew inside was a story worth reading. This land was the same. She just had to clear away the damage to show the beauty underneath. With a renewed sense of purpose, she went back to work. She wasn't just digging. She was uncovering. She wasn't just pulling weeds. She was making space. She worked for another 2 hours, stopping only to drink water from a thermos she'd brought. By the time she was done, she had cleared a patch about 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She had claimed it. She knelt down, her knees protesting, and ran her gloved fingers through the dark earth. It felt cool and full of promise. The next day she returned, and the day after that, The small patch began to grow, a clean brown rectangle in a sea of green and gray. Her body started to adapt. The aches were still there, but they felt different. Like the satisfying soreness of a good workout rather than the pain of injury. Her hands, though still tender, were getting tougher. She started to learn the land. She found where the soil was softer, where the worst of the weeds were concentrated. It was a silent conversation between her and the earth. On the fourth day, a Wednesday afternoon, she decided it was time. She had gone to the local nursery and bought a flat of small, bright orange marigolds. They were simple, hardy flowers, exactly what the mayor would have approved of. Planting them felt like a definitive act, a point of no return. She worked carefully, digging small holes and gently placing each plant into its new home, patting the soil around its base. She stood back and looked at the neat row of green leaves and promising buds. It was a splash of life, a line of color drawn against the brown. It was her first answer to the doubters. A quiet but firm statement. She was watering them with an old watering can she'd found in her garage when she heard a voice from the fence line that separated the garden from the neighboring property. You know, they told you to keep it simple for a reason. Clara looked up. It was the old man who lived in the house next to the lot. She had seen him from a distance, a solitary figure often sitting on his porch. He was leaning on his fence, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I'm just starting," Clara said, her voice quieter than she intended. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's what they all say. I've lived here for 40 years. I've seen a dozen people with big ideas for this patch of dirt. They all start with a shovel and a smile. They all end with a sigh and a for sale sign on their house." He pointed a gnarled finger at her small patch of marigolds. "This place is a lost cause. You're just wasting your time and your money." His words were like stones, sharp and cold. They hit her right in the spot where her own doubts lived. She felt her shoulders slump. All her hard work, all her hope felt foolish in the face of his certainty. She wanted to argue, to tell him about her vision, about the potential she saw. But she couldn't find the words. He was just an old man on a fence, but in that moment, his voice was the voice of everyone who had ever told her no, who had ever told her to be realistic. To keep her dreams small, the old man watched her for a moment longer, then shook his head and turned, walking back toward his house without another word. Clara stood there, the watering can heavy in her hand, watching him go. The vibrant orange of the marigolds suddenly seemed duller. The ache in her back returned, stronger this time. She felt very alone, a tiny figure fighting a battle everyone else had already lost. She thought about just leaving, going home, soaking in a hot bath and forgetting the whole thing. But then she looked back at the row of small plants. They were so new, so vulnerable. They needed her. His words had been meant to stop her, but as the initial sting faded, they began to do something else. They lit a small, steady fire inside her. He was wrong. It wasn't a lost cause. It was just a cause that required more work than people were willing to give. She was willing. She took a deep breath, raised the watering can, and carefully finished watering the marigolds. Then she put the can down, picked up her shovel, and drove it back into the hard, unyielding ground. The sound of the blade hitting the earth was sharp and clear. It was the sound of her answer. She wasn't doing this for him, or for the mayor, or for anyone else. She was doing it for this small patch of earth, and for the quiet, stubborn story she knew it had to tell. The work was far from over. In fact, it had just truly begun. The old man's words stayed with her, echoing in her mind long after he had disappeared back into his house. They were a heavy cloak of doubt trying to settle on her shoulders. For the rest of that day and for the whole of the next, Clara worked with a new kind of quietness. It wasn't the peaceful, focused quiet from before. It was a heavy, lonely silence. The shovel felt heavier, the sun hotter. Every time she looked at the small row of marigolds, their bright orange seemed to mock her, a tiny, cheerful army fighting a war it couldn't possibly win. She was just one person, after all. What could one person really do against 40 years of neglect? but she kept going. Shove, lever, toss. The rhythm was her only answer to the cynicism. She was stubborn, a quality that had served her well over the years, but had also gotten her into trouble. It was the same stubbornness that made her stay late at the library to reshelve a messy cart instead of leaving it for the next shift. It was the stubbornness that made her believe every book, no matter how damaged, deserved a chance to be read. This garden was just a bigger, dirtier book. One afternoon, a few days after the encounter with the neighbor, Clara was on her knees, carefully weeding around her precious marigolds. She was so focused she didn't notice the approach of a young woman pushing a stroller. The toddler in the stroller, a little boy with a shock of blonde hair, had been watching her with wide, curious eyes. As Clara sat back on her heels to wipe a smear of dirt from her cheek, the boy pointed a chubby finger. "Flower," he squealed, his voice full of pure, unfiltered joy. Clara couldn't help but smile. "Yes, that's a flower," she said softly. The mother, who looked tired but kind, smiled apologetically. "Sorry if he's bothering you. He's just discovered colors." "Not at all," Clara said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. It was the first positive interaction she'd had while working here. It was a small crack in the wall of her solitude. The mother lingered for a moment, looking at the cleared patch of earth and the row of marigolds. "This is wonderful," she said, her voice sincere. "I walk by here every day, and I've never seen anyone doing anything. It's really nice to see some life here." Clara just nodded, not sure what to say. The simple compliment felt like a huge reward. The next afternoon, as Clara was packing up her tools, the young mother was walking back down the street. This time, she was carrying a tray. She approached Clara hesitantly. "I brought you something," she said, holding out the tray. On it were 2 tall glasses of what looked like lemonade, glistening with condensation, and a small, folded piece of paper. "But you didn't have to do that," Clara said, genuinely surprised. "I wanted to," the mother insisted. "You're working so hard. It's inspiring." She gestured to the note. "My son and I made you a thank you card." Clara took one of the glasses. The coldness felt wonderful against her tired hands. She took a sip. It was sweet and tart, the most refreshing thing she had ever tasted. She unfolded the paper. Inside was a crayon drawing of a big orange flower and a small, smiling stick figure next to it. Below it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for making our town beautiful." Clara felt a sudden tightness in her throat. She looked from the drawing to the mother's smiling face, then to the little boy who was now trying to climb out of his stroller to get a closer look at the real flowers. This was it. This was the reason. It wasn't about proving the old man wrong or defying the mayor. It was about this. It was about creating a small moment of joy for a mother and her child. The next morning, Clara found a burlap sack sitting on her front porch. It was heavy, and inside were dozens of tulip bulbs, their papery skins a mix of purple and white. There was no note, but she knew exactly where they had come from. She glanced over at Mr. Henderson's house. His curtains twitched, and he quickly pulled them shut. He couldn't bring himself to say he was sorry, or that he might have been wrong, but this was his way of saying it. It was a quiet, gruff offering of peace. Clara smiled to herself. The ripples were spreading. A week later, a city truck pulled up near the garden. A man in a uniform got out and opened the passenger door. A teenage boy slouched out, his shoulders hunched, a pair of headphones clamped over his ears. He looked around with a bored, defiant expression. The community service officer spoke to Clara for a moment. "This is Leo. He's got a few weekends of service to work off. He's yours to command." The officer left, and Clara was alone with the boy. He didn't look at her, just kicked at a rock on the sidewalk. Clara's heart sank. This was not the kind of help she needed. She needed willing hands, not a sullen teenager forced to be here. "All right," she said, her voice gentle. "We can start with something simple. See that pile of weeds over there? We need to move it to the compost bin at the back of the lot." Leo just shrugged, pulling his phone out of his pocket and starting to type. Clara sighed, but decided not to push it. She went back to her own work, clearing another section of land. For the first hour, Leo did the bare minimum, moving a few branches and then leaning against a tree, lost in his phone. Clara didn't say a word. She just kept working, her steady rhythmic movements a stark contrast to his stillness. Finally, he seemed to get bored. He put his phone away and started watching her. He watched how she measured out a path, how she stacked the rocks she found into a neat border. After a while, he walked over. "Why are you putting the rocks there?" he asked, his voice flat. "It'll be a border," Clara explained, without stopping. "To keep the soil in and define the walkway?" He squinted at her rough layout. "You should curve it more," he said, a hint of something other than boredom in his voice for the first time. "A straight line is boring. If you curve it around that big tree, it'll look more natural." Clara stopped and looked at where he was pointing. He was right. It was a much better idea. "That's a good suggestion," she said. "Show me." For the rest of the day, a change came over the boy. He put his phone away for good. He started moving the rocks, not just piling them, but placing them with a surprising sense of artistry. He had a good eye, a natural instinct for shape and flow. He wasn't just a worker. He was a creator. Clara found herself asking his opinion more and more. He was quiet, but his ideas were good. He suggested where to plant the tulip bulbs for the best impact in the spring. He sketched out a design for a small circular seating area in the center of the garden. By the end of the day, as the sun began to set, Clara looked at the garden. It was transformed. The cleared area was 3 times as big as it had been that morning. A new, elegant stone path curved through it, and the tulip bulbs were nestled in the dark earth. Leo was packing up, his slouch completely gone. He even gave her a small, shy nod before he walked off to meet his ride. Clara stood alone in the quiet twilight. The air filled with the scent of fresh earth. The simple project was no longer simple. It was no longer just hers. It had been touched by a child's wonder, a neighbor's silent apology, and a teenager's hidden talent. The ripples were no longer just spreading. They were starting to converge, creating a current that was much stronger than she had ever anticipated. The following Saturday, the air was filled with a new kind of energy. Clara arrived, as usual, with her thermos of tea and her gloves, but she was not the first one there. Leo was already there, leaning against the big oak tree, but he wasn't alone. With him were 2 other boys and a girl, all around the same age, looking a bit uncertain, but curious. They had the slightly awkward posture of teenagers who weren't sure what they were supposed to be doing. Clara's heart gave a little flutter of anxiety. This was uncharted territory. Her quiet, solitary project now had an audience, and a young one at that. "Hey," Leo said, pushing himself off the tree. "I told them you needed some help. Hope that's okay." Clara looked at the group. One boy was tall and lanky, another was short and stocky. The girl had bright pink hair and a sketchbook tucked under her arm. They all looked at her with a mix of challenge and interest. "Of course," Clara said, her voice warmer than she felt. "The more the merrier. There's plenty to do." Leo immediately took charge, pointing to the pile of old, mismatched bricks that had been dumped near the edge of the property by a construction crew a few weeks back. "Okay, so we're going to build that path. We need to carry the bricks over here one by one." "Don't just throw them," the lanky boy groaned. "Man, that's going to take forever." "Just get started," Leo said, with a confidence Clara hadn't seen in him before. To her surprise, they did. The work was slow and clumsy at first. The teenagers were more interested in their music and joking around than in the task at hand. But Leo kept them focused. He showed them how to set the bricks firmly into the dirt, how to follow the curve he had designed. Clara, watching from a distance, realized she wasn't in charge anymore. She was a consultant. This was Leo's project now, too. The real turning point came a few days later. The young mother, the one with the little boy, stopped by again. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 other mothers with strollers were with her. "I posted about what you're doing on the community page," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "A bunch of us wanted to help. We were thinking we could have a weeding party this weekend. Bring the kids, some snacks, make a day of it." Clara was speechless. A weeding party? The concept was foreign to her. Her idea of work was quiet and solitary, but she saw the genuine enthusiasm on their faces and could only nod. That would be wonderful. That Saturday, the garden was transformed. It was no longer a quiet work site. It was a gathering place. The teenagers were there, laying the brick path with impressive speed. The mothers had spread out blankets on a patch of grass Clara had cleared, and their toddlers were playing while the women pulled weeds from a new section, chatting and laughing. Someone had brought a portable speaker that played soft, upbeat music. The air, which once smelled only of damp earth, now carried the scent of coffee and freshly baked muffins. Even Mr. Henderson, the grumpy neighbor, made an appearance. He didn't come over, but he spent a good hour on his porch, just watching. Later, Clara found a brand new trowel and a pair of gardening gloves sitting on her pile of tools. They weren't old like his things would be. They were new, from the hardware store. It was his quiet contribution, his way of being part of the movement without having to admit it. The project began to take on a life of its own. A local carpenter, driving by, stopped and dropped off a pile of scrap wood. "For benches," he said before driving off. A woman who ran a small cafe brought out a large dispenser of iced tea for the workers. The garden was no longer just Clara's vision. It was a tapestry woven from the threads of the entire community. The cleared area expanded daily. The brick path snaked elegantly through the middle. Leo and the girl with the pink hair, whose name was Anya, and who turned out to be a talented artist, began sketching out plans for different sections: a quiet corner for reading, a small plot for vegetables, a circle of stones for a campfire. The buzz was undeniable. People were talking about it at the grocery store, at the post office. The forgotten patch of land was now the most exciting place in town. It was only a matter of time before the mayor heard. He showed up one afternoon, unannounced. He parked his car and just stood there for a long moment, his mouth slightly open. What he saw was not the few flower beds he had authorized. He saw a dozen people working together. He saw a beautiful brick path taking shape. He saw children laughing and teenagers working with a sense of purpose. He saw Mr. Henderson actually talking to one of the young mothers, pointing to a spot in the soil, Clara, who was showing Anya how to properly stake a young tomato plant. Saw him and walked over, wiping her hands on her jeans. "There," she said. A little nervously, he just shook his head, slowly, a look of disbelief on his face. "Clara, what in the world did you do?" I just started," she said. "And then people started to help." He walked over to the brick path, running his hand over the neat, sturdy pattern. This is incredible. This isn't simple at all." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not just a tired official, but a proud resident. "You were right. I was wrong. I told you to keep it simple because I was afraid of failure. I was afraid it would fall apart and become another disappointment for this town." He gestured to the bustling scene around them. "But you didn't just build a garden. You built a team. You built hope." He paused, looking at the teenagers, the mothers, the old man watching from his porch. "The town council is meeting next week. I'm going to propose we allocate some funds from the contingency budget. For real tools. For soil. For whatever you need." He smiled, a genuine, wide smile. "You've already done the hard part. You brought the town back to life." As he walked back to his car, Clara felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost brought her to her knees. This was it. This was the instead. They had told her to keep it simple, to expect little, to not get her hopes up. But by ignoring that advice, by following her quiet, stubborn heart, she had stumbled upon something much bigger. This was no longer just a garden project. It was a movement. It was the story of the town being rewritten right in front of her, one brick, one flower, one helping hand at a time. A year can feel like a lifetime, or it can pass in the blink of an eye. For Clara, the year that followed the mayor's visit was both. It was a blur of activity, of sunny mornings and muddy afternoons, of the steady rhythm of a community coming alive. The land, that was once a forgotten patch of weeds, was now unrecognizable. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was the beating heart of the town, The simple request had blossomed into something complex, messy, and breathtakingly beautiful. The brick path, now finished, wound through different sections like a story. In one corner, there was the food pantry garden with neat rows of tomatoes, zucchini, and lettuce. Every week, a different group of volunteers would harvest the produce and deliver it to the local food bank, turning the garden's bounty into direct help for those in need. It was an idea that had come from one of the mothers, a way to give back. Another section was a children's sensory garden. It's filled with soft lamb's ear, fragrant lavender, and plants with interesting textures. It was a place where toddlers could touch and smell without being told, "Don't touch." Leo and his friends had built a small, sturdy wooden fence around it, and Anya, the girl with the pink hair, had painted colorful murals of flowers and bugs on the wooden planks. Near the old oak tree, the reading corner had taken shape. The local lumber yard, inspired by the project, had donated several sturdy wooden benches. One of them had a small brass plaque on it, placed there without a big announcement. It read, "In memory of John, who loved a good story." Clara had found it one morning and had to sit down, tears welling in her eyes. It was a quiet tribute to her late husband from a town that had barely known her, a sign that she had truly become a part of it. The town council, true to the mayor's word, had allocated funds. But it turned out they didn't need much. The townspeople had become the garden's greatest resource. A retired plumber installed a simple irrigation system. A group of fishermen built a beautiful arbor out of driftwood for the entrance. The community bulletin board, also built from scrap wood, was constantly covered in notices. Free tomato seedlings. Anyone have extra straw for the potato patch? Garden work party this Saturday? To mark the 1-year anniversary, the town decided to hold its first ever harvest festival in the garden. The day was crisp and golden, the air filled with the scent of apples, cinnamon, and damp earth. Strings of warm lights were hung from the trees, and tables were laden with food made from the garden's own produce. There was pumpkin soup, zucchini bread, and vats of hot apple cider. Clara moved through the crowd, not as a guest of honor, but as a quiet observer. She was no longer the sole gardener. She was one of many, a steady presence in the background, making sure everyone had what they needed. She saw the young mother she'd first met serving cider, her face lit with a happy smile. She saw Mr. Henderson, the grumpy neighbor, carefully arranging a pyramid of pumpkins near the entrance, pointing out the best ones to the children. He had become the unofficial guardian of the pumpkin patch. As the sun began to set, the mayor climbed onto a small makeshift stage made from wooden crates. The crowd quieted down, turning to face him. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the garden, glowing in the twilight. "A year ago," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I stood on this very spot, which was nothing but dirt and weeds. And I told a certain person," he looked directly at Clara and smiled, "to keep it simple." A few people in the crowd chuckled. "I said that because I was afraid," he continued. "I was afraid of big promises and broken dreams. I thought simple was safe. But I was wrong. I was looking at this plot of land as a problem to be managed. But Clara," he paused, "she saw it as a story to be written. And she didn't just write it herself. She handed out the pens." He gestured to the people around him. She handed a pen to a mother who wanted a better place for her kids. She handed a pen to a teenager who needed a purpose. She even handed a pen to a grumpy old neighbor who forgot he had a heart. Mr. Henderson blushed and looked down at his shoes. "You were told to keep it simple," the mayor said, his voice ringing with conviction. "But you understood something that we all forgot. Community is never simple. It's complicated. It's messy. It takes work. It's full of different people with different ideas. But that's what makes it beautiful. You didn't just restore a garden, you restored us. You reminded us that we are better together." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound so loud and full of love it seemed to shake the leaves from the trees. People turned to look at Clara, clapping for her. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks and simply nodded, her heart too full to speak. After the speech, she wandered over to the food pantry garden. Leo was there, showing a group of younger kids how to pick the ripest tomatoes. He wasn't the sullen boy she had first met. He was confident and kind, a natural leader. He saw her and gave her a respectful nod, the kind of nod one gives a mentor. Clara stood there for a long time, just watching. She watched the children playing, the neighbors talking, the teenagers working. She saw the connections that had been forged in this soil, friendships that had grown alongside the vegetables and flowers. She realized that the harvest wasn't just the food they had grown. The real harvest was this feeling of belonging, this sense of shared purpose, this quiet, humming joy. They had told her to keep it simple, a request born from a fear of disappointment. But by following her heart instead of their instructions, she had cultivated something far more profound. She had taken a simple, empty plot of land and, with the help of an entire town, had turned it into a home.